Hazard pay is back on in the third stimulus package. $10,000, $13 an hour, those are the calculations of the 2020 HEROES Act. But will they be merged into the third stimulus package? This week we will see the bill. In 2020, Nancy Pelosi calculated hazard pay the following: $13 an hour times the number of hours you worked, part-time, full-time, overtime, from the start of the pandemic, January 2020, to 30 days after it's over, up to $10,000 if you made less than $100,000 in 2019. So will that calculation be used in the third stimulus package? Enjoy this throwback video in which I explain hazard pay, how it's calculated, who are essential workers, who applies for it, and how you get hazard pay under the latest stimulus package. Hazard pay heats up as a second stimulus package agreement nears. Hey, good afternoon, everybody. This is LALATE. Thank you for joining me for Afternoons LALATE. This is our 2-hour programming block every day that starts at 3:30 Pacific Standard Time. It starts with a check, then goes to hazard pay at 4 p.m., next FPUC at 4:30, and finally rent assistance at 5 o'clock. Big developments about hazard pay, that $10,000 from the federal government proposed in the Democrat plan, that if you worked as an essential worker are entitled to. It's a lot of money, you're owed the money, and employers currently are acting a little bit strange about hazard pay, even just today. Really breaking news developments about what's going on with hazard pay essential workers and the essential workplace as the Democrats really keep on point. The latest developments out of Washington are that the Republicans are not really cohesive, that the Democratic proposal, the HEROES Act, seems likely to get approved shortly, that there's no opposition to hazard pay, that the Democrats are saying they're not going to pass any bill unless it has hazard pay in there, and all indications are that you will likely get hazard pay. But there's one culprit in this entire mix, and who is it? It's not necessarily Mitch, it's called broadcast news. As people have been tweeting me and sending me on Instagram messages over the last 24 hours, they say, LALATE, why is it that you are the only one talking about hazard pay? In fact, there's someone on Twitter who actually established a Twitter handle just for hazard pay. People are very troubled by the lack of support from political leaders for essential workers during this pandemic. And when we have a stimulus check debate about workers, no one's mentioning essential workers until last week. Last Friday, the vocalizing came out strong and firm. It came from Bernie Sanders. It came from a lot of leading senators and House members to say, hey, you must have hazard pay in this bill. You know why it's even more important than ever? It's what's happening now on a local level. If you've not seen it, LA can report that really, whether you are in California or New York, whether you're in a grocery store or a distribution center, employers are really not valuing essential workers this month the way they were earlier in the pandemic. When the pandemic first hit, everyone understood your value on the front line and had you work, but didn't necessarily compensate you additional. Sometimes they did. Sometimes they didn't. Some of the unions, especially in the grocery stores, gave additional money, got additional money for their essential workers in their union, like in Kroger and Albertsons. They got, I think it was $3 an hour additional. That was then. As the lockdowns were lifted and people started getting back to slight normalcy, but then were reinstituted in some regards, the number of people back at the supermarkets was not strong. The number of people getting the deliveries was not the same. In essence, the drive of consumer spending was not there like you saw when the pandemic first hit, when people had a lot of money, or more money than they have now. So what's happened, LALATE? Well, a lot of businesses are not interested in giving you hazard pay on a state level or a local level or a business level. And that's why federal hazard pay is needed more than ever. Because when you have businesses not willing to compensate you, ordering you back to work, the situation is so dire. Let me explain to you how dire the situation is. I had a person send me a very kind message overnight. Said, hey, I used to work at a restaurant before the pandemic. And my doctor says because I have a very bad breathing problem, it's not safe for me to go back to work. I'm on unemployment benefits. What's going to happen when my employer yesterday sent, hey, I have a job for you. You can come back now. I don't want to go back because I don't want to get COVID-19. Here's the situation. This is not an unusual situation. The situation is states say you are disqualified for unemployment benefits because you were offered a job and you did not go back to work. Now, you go back to work in a restaurant which qualifies as hazard pay. It's itemized, it's line itemed as hazard pay in the hazard pay bill. You go back to work. What does that employer do for you? Well, on a state level, they may do nothing. They may not give you a bonus. They may just, treat you like a given day in 2019 or 2018. And it's that type of concern that why people are saying you must pass hazard pay. Now, one of the things I don't often talk about with the hazard pay bill, which is so important, it also includes provisions to ensure workplace safety, to ensure that guy that's going back to work at the restaurant, if he does take the job back, is safe, that he does not contract COVID-19, that his lungs are not, jeopardized. And his situation is not different. So when we talk about hazard pay, we don't just talk about money. We talk about a safe workplace. We talk about money going forward. We talk about $13 an hour for every hour you work going forward, whether you're essential or part-time or full-time or overtime. And so when we have employers saying, hey, I own this restaurant, but I don't have a lot of people buying fettuccine linguine anymore. It's not like it was back in February. I can't pay you hazard pay. I don't make enough money anymore. I barely make my bills. Well, what are we going to do about the employee? Here is the data. A new report from Paycheck CEO Martin Mucci minutes ago, obtained by LALATE, said that small business employment is falling apart and is becoming precarious during the beginning of this is becoming as precarious as it was when COVID first hit. We saw that July jobs numbers index dropped. That puts us back to about April, so we're flat over the last 3 months. The stimulus certainly helped in June and July. The stimulus he's talking about is stimulus for businesses that got people back to work, gave businesses money so that they can pay employees to get back to work. Right now, the biggest issue for business is uncertainty. There's a lot of uncertainty about PPP loans, the flexibility of those loan funds, when they would be paid back. What you have to understand is that even though I'm not a proponent of PPP loans, I hate them, even though we don't sometimes want to talk about businesses getting funding, when businesses are on the brink of bankruptcy, when businesses are becoming zombie businesses, as Mr. Wonderful on Shark Tank calls them, businesses that are on their last breath, when they are on the last breath, do you think they're going to pay you hazard pay? No. Do you think they're going to ask you to go to work and get to work and do everything the way you would have done in 2019, irrespective of your health or safety? Maybe. And so he calls this catastrophic consequences. They're really looking more for loans. These businesses need the loans. They're not at a point where they can survive without the loans. Now, the great news, if you watch the video minutes before this at 3:30 Pacific Standard Time, there is an agreement on the second stimulus check to give more business loans. If that's true, that would create liquidity and have the ability for business to continue. And then there's this. No one's ever thought about this, not even myself, until minutes ago when you saw my delayed reaction. If a business goes bankrupt, who's going to get your hazard pay money for you? Ever think about that? If the business that you're working for today is no longer around tomorrow and the bill is passed for hazard pay, who's going to get your hazard pay? Ultimately, that's the problem. Because hazard pay requires, as drafted in the Democrats' proposal, requires the employer, not you, to apply for the hazard pay. Well, that's a problem, LALATE. Yeah, it is. Because if your employer goes belly up because the second stimulus package was not approved or is delayed, or they didn't get the loan fast enough and they don't have enough money to exist, then they're not going to even have money to pay for a bookkeeper to do your hazard pay bills. You know, when I did the hazard pay videos, I always would talk about employers may not want to do hazard pay calculations because it requires bookkeeping, and they don't want to do bookkeeping for free. They're not making money on hazard pay. Mitt Romney solves this problem by proposing a different hazard pay bill, which I think is incredible. I mean, it's really great news. His hazard pay bill pays the employers to get the hazard pay money for you and requires the employer to get the hazard pay bill money for you. But unless Mitt's bill is merged with a Democratic bill, then we have a problem. And the problem is not just a helicopter. The problem is that ultimately you have to have an employer still around to apply for your hazard pay. Here's the calculation. If you worked in the pandemic any hour, full-time, part-time, partial, whatever, overtime, from January up to the present, you're entitled to $13 an hour times the number of hours up to $10,000 if you made $100,000 or less 2019. That's the calculation. If you made over $100,000 in 2019, then it's $5,000 you're entitled to. And if you're not at that threshold, then you get a lump sum for that check, and then going forward, you get $13 an hour. That's all great if the employer is still around. What if the employer's gone bankrupt? What if the employers closed their doors? What if you were told your last day to work was yesterday and the employer has now closed and is now home? Who's going to get that hazard pay money for me, LALATE? Yeah, it's a problem. It really is a problem. New business startups are almost 10% over the same year. That's a sign that entrepreneurs are finding opportunities. I think we're going to get a going ahead. It's just a bit slower than else. I think the government will get together to figure out how more stimulus is out there for individuals and small businesses. Great news. This is Moochie, not Mnuchin. This is Moochie. He says despite how bad the situation is, he thinks the second stimulus package is going to get approved this week. I think the government will get it together to figure it out, how more stimulus to get out there for individuals and small businesses. They're really looking for those loans, and they need them right now. And ultimately, that's what's great. What's great is while we're sitting here, we understand what we have to do. We understand you're essential. We understand you're valuable. We understand you worked in the pandemic and will continue to hopefully work during the pandemic if you still have a job. We understand that you are entitled to additional sums of money for what you did, and that we value your work. And then there's that other guy. Oh boy, that's a big helicopter. Two questions I get in the opening credits was, is that seal in the opening credits real? Yeah, he is real, and that really is him barking. And there is a helicopter in the opening credits if you look carefully. I did not put that helicopter in there accidentally, by the way. Boy, I don't know what's going on. Maybe I just don't know what's going on today. They just don't like me reporting. And anyway, what's important to understand is that there's a movement to really get you the stimulus money. There's a movement to get you the hazard pay. There's no one saying you're not entitled to hazard pay. There's just not enough chatter about it. And ultimately, the only people you should be pissed at are the broadcast news reporters who have not put this front and center. And even yesterday, a lot of people were sending me that New York Times article's front page, which was talking about business closing across the country. You know what my response was? This is not today news. This is old news. This channel has gotten businesses $5 to $20 million in EIDL loan money that they were entitled to, but had not gotten it but for this channel very early on in April. But here we are in August, and the attention is not just businesses, but employees who put their lives on the line to get your businesses going during, before, and after the pandemic. And you deserve to be rewarded. But one guy thinks you aren't. That's Mitch McConnell. He has introduced a really disgraceful bill that says that you cannot sue your employer for anything that's a hazardous in the work environment unless the employer intentionally caused COVID-19, which is basically coughing on you. It's a bill so outrageous, and you would think it's not anything to worry about that's going to fall on the wayside. But as this channel reported minutes ago at 3:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time in our check video, it's really one of the provisions that's holding up this entire second stimulus agreement. Yeah. So it's not so much that they can't agree upon hazard pay, it's that idiot from Kentucky is holding up the agreements because he wants something in there that is sort of anti-hazard pay. If you have questions in today's video, drop them in the comments below. This is our second of 4 videos coming up next at my math, 4:30 Pacific Standard Time is FPUC. Big developments on unemployment, really big developments. Join me for that video. And then shortly, 30 minutes thereafter, is rent assistance. And later tonight, evenings LALATE starting at 6:45 Pacific Standard Time. As always, stay informed, stay motivated, stay inspired, and stay FLA for more.